Good evening, good afternoon. So let's start by talking about compassion today. And in particular, we're going to talk about self-compassion and going through some exercises that you can do to develop the skill. And we'll look at the benefits of that as well, which is quite plentiful actually. So on the agenda today, we're going to start by looking at what compassion is. Then we are going to look at the three components of compassion, which are self-kindness, the first one, common humanity, and then mindfulness as the third one. Then we will look at the importance of self-compassion. Why do we have to be self-compassionate? And what does it benefit us and our mind, emotions, and our body? We're going to be discussing the attributes of the caring, compassionate mind and what it does to us as well. How does it feel like? And what does it do for us? Then we're going to look at exercises to actually develop self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So each of these things we're going to look at how to put into practice to develop self-compassion. And then we're going to look at some other exercises to train the compassionate mind as well. So first of all, what is compassion? Experts tell us that compassion is the concern for the alleviation of the suffering of sentient beings, and this includes the self. So as I said, compassion can be for another person or another being, but more importantly, action as a starting point is to be self-compassionate, to have compassion for the self as well. So another meaning of compassion is the sensitivity to the suffering of the self and others, and to have a deep commitment to try and relieve and prevent it. And this is an important distinction between compassion, for instance, and something like empathy, is this deep commitment to try and do something to relieve and prevent it, either again for the self or for another person or being. It's got three pillars as well, which is also different from something like empathy. It's got a cognitive pillar, which is an awareness of another person or your own suffering, an emotional pillar. So it's the awareness or the felt sense when emotions are rising, when confronted with suffering, and it triggers then the bonding hormone oxytocin. Then also a distinction with something like empathy, which is more emotion-based, not as cognitive-based or behavioral-based, is being moved to alleviate that suffering, which triggers the drive hormone dopamine. So it actually builds motivation for us to do something. And of course, self-compassion is compassion that is directed inward. What I call the thieves of self-compassion. So here are some things that are going to be standing in the way, that's going to present a hurdle or a barrier for you to actually develop compassion and to feel self-compassion. Comparing ourselves with others. So this is where a harsh critic comes in and says, you can never be good enough. Somebody else is always better. We talk about imposter syndrome, you feeling that you are a fraud, that you don't know enough, that you are trying to sort of act in a sense that you know a lot and you don't really do that. And then it's dependent on performance as well. So you feel that you've got to perform the whole time. Relinquishing that type of wanting to control your performance, feeling that you need to perform, that your sense of self-worth is actually dependent on that performance. You also may fear that you're losing motivation, and that is again linked by comparison and linked to our performance, that we feel if we lose motivation, then maybe we're not going to be performing as good. We're not going to compare well to others. We're going to look bad in others' eyes. So the third one is the fear of losing motivation. And then in the fourth place, we can confuse it with self-pity or being selfish. So we feel that self-compassion is somehow taking away from our feeling for other people, caring for other people, that we're taking time and energy away to ourselves. And it again associates with number 5, which is that it is self-indulgent. So we feel that we take that time and energy, we spend it on ourselves, and not realizing that we actually need to do that. We need to build our own energy, build our own balance, build our own inner harmony, enable to care for others and to spend that energy and time on others' suffering as well. And the last one is a feeling that self-compassion is weak. It's not strong. It's not directed towards goals, towards performance, that it is just weak. It's a distraction from other things that we should be doing, which, as we'll go through the presentation, we'll see that it's not the case at all. Now, why is self-compassion? Compassion in the first place, and then it starts with self-compassion, as we'll see throughout the presentation as well. Why is it important? First of all, it's a skill that can be taught. And why is this important? It means that it's not something that we're born with, that is fixed in us, that we cannot change, that we have to live with if we don't have all that much compassion. We can actually teach ourselves to be compassionate and to reap the benefits of that skill that we have developed. As such, it's a resource, an inner resource, that if you've developed it and taught yourself to be compassionate and practiced it, it's a resource that is always available when we need it. And it's a very powerful resource. So when we go through difficulty and suffering, or see around us going through that, we can tap into that resource and draw on that energy to motivate us to feel something and to do something to help ourselves or the other person to get through the difficulty. Self-compassion and compassion as well fosters connectedness rather than separation or self-centeredness. So it's in direct against opposition of what we said before, that it's self-indulgent. It's actually against self-centeredness. Even if it's self-compassion, it fosters a connection, a thought that everybody is somehow connected and working in a larger system toward one future, one goal, one larger goal, whether it's existential or not. In the fourth place, self-compassion involves relating to yourself in your life with an open mind and heart. So we'll see later on that you do a reality check first of all, and then there are some steps and some elements that you go through to open your mind and heart to yourself and to embrace the entire self with open arms and acceptance, instead of just being critical and fixating on the things that are wrong and that can maybe be improved, but it all starts with acceptance. So then again, it transforms suffering into an opportunity for kindness and connectedness. So it's the observation of suffering, the understanding and awareness of suffering, the felt sense of that, that is motivating us to actually do something kind and to connect to others to relieve that suffering. And then in the process, compassion and self-compassion taps into the soothing caregiving system that deactivates the threat stress system. Why is this important? And we'll see later on and we've talked in earlier presentations as well about the terrible symptoms and consequences that a highly active threat stress system can have on our health, our bodies, our emotions, and our psychology of mind. It's when cortisol is activated, we are the whole time constantly in a flight freeze type system, that we need to act feel that we need to act the whole time, and we don't put enough thought and enough balanced emotions behind it. So that's why we need to get ourselves into that soothing caregiving system, and that will help the stress system to deactivate and to retreat, and gives us a relief from that, that constant stress or acute stress. So it's important to understand that compassion is a flow. It's a flow of cognitions, of emotions, and then that motivates us to actually do something to alleviate the situation for ourselves and others. And there are different exercises and practices for each of these flows. So it's the other to the self. So accepting compassion from others is a practice that you can do as well. And it's very good for relationships and for yourself as well, to accept when somebody else bestows you compassion from their side. Then the reverse, from the self to others. So there are exercises and practices that you can do to develop your skill of compassion to other people. So it's awareness, it's acceptance, it's your observation skills, then a relational connect other person, and then a motivation to act. And then there's a self to self, and we're going to be talking mostly about this type of flow in the rest of the presentation, because compassion and the practice of compassion actually all starts with self-compassion and practicing self-compassion and getting used to living that kind of life. So as I said, compassion, all kinds of compassion, including self-compassion, begins with a reality check. So we need to understand, first of all, that we've got gene-built, evolved brains. So what does that mean? It means partly as it's evolved through the ages and through many, many generations, our brains are functioning like it is. Its primary concern is actually to protect ourselves from possible harm. Now, our brains may instinctively try to protect us from harm that doesn't really exist. But in a way, in the past, it made sense for it to always protect us. And then the genes are passed on from generation to generation. So it's like a hand of cards that we dealt with, and we need to try and make the best of it. And as we said, compassion can be taught. So we can take these genes, this hand of cards that we dealt with, and we can actually exchange at least one or two of those cards and build compassion to make the whole hand actually work better for us. So we are all born, we grow, mature, decline, and die while we are susceptible to disease and injury. which are all physical, mental, and psychological. And while this may sound very negative, this is the reality. And at every time, there are certain things that we can do to make the best of it. And self-compassion really helps in all of these stages. We are socially shaped, very important. So we've got our brains, which are functioning as it was evolved over many thousands of years. And then we've got the genes that are passed on, but then we also are socially shaped. So this is the nature-nurture debate that we are left with. So we've got both parts. So from the gene expressions, sense of self, relationship with others, from even before we were born, and especially the first couple of years of our lives, we are socially shaped. We develop certain attachment styles, which may be secure or not secure. It's contextual, so it depends on the situations that we find ourselves in. And we carry this into adulthood. But even these attachment styles and personality styles that we've learned and developed since childhood, we can adapt and we can change it at least somehow into adulthood, depending on the practices that we do. And these self-compassion exercises will actually help you shape your personality and your attachment style to be more socially connected to other people and other beings. And all of this comes down to the fact that we did not design the present moment. Maybe we had a hand in it, the decisions that we made or whatever, but that is only part of the story. Much of the present moment is really just, how it happened to be. So part of where we find ourselves at the moment is due to our own decisions, and part of it is not. So we did not choose our past circumstances either, for a large part. Then we need to understand that there are sort of two brains, and our old brain is the one that is prone to stress. It's prone to being competitive, fixating and ruminating on emotions, on motives, and on self-serving relationships and other selfish, call it selfish needs, which is not bad in a sense, because selfish needs, remember that our brain wants to protect us. It wants us to succeed and most of all to survive and have enough resources to survive. So it's actually designed to be selfish and to act in that way. But then we can have develop a new mindful and compassionate brain. And we can use imagination and integration with the world and with others to better connect with and participate in the world, and be a part of the future of the world, and be a part, rather work on surviving through connections in a more holistic sense than what our old brain tries to do, to separate ourselves and to be selfish in order to survive and to thrive. So this reality check, the idea with this is to reduce the guilt, blame, and shame that you could feel when you put too much responsibility on your own choices, and think that where you are and who you are now is completely your doing, which is not the case at all. So by understanding this, by orienting us in this way, we set ourselves up to have acceptance and to work towards reparation right now. So the caring, compassionate mind, and this diagram makes me kind of think of a pod or a nest of some sort. And this is the idea with that. So the attributes inside the caring, compassionate mind is what creates the warmth and the growth all around us, inside and outside of us. So we talked a little bit about sympathy and empathy, and I told you guys before, it's a part of compassion, but it's a sub-part of compassion. And here it is as some of the attributes of the caring, compassionate mind. The others are sensitivity, care for well-being, non-judgment, and distress tolerance. And all of these things, they don't necessarily involve action, but all of these things together lead to compassion, which is connected to, remember, the three pillars: the thinking process, the emotions, and then the actions as well. So it's very important that compassion is not only a way of thinking and feeling, it leads to action. The three elements of self-compassion. This comes from Dr. Kristen Neff, the biggest compassion expert in the world. So the first one is self-kindness versus self-judgment. So they are juxtapositioned against one another. So instead of self-judging, one should develop self-kindness. And that means treating ourselves with a kindness and consideration of our own needs. And this is important, as I said, if you don't have the consideration for yourself and looking after your own needs, you will not be able to feel compassion for other people and to consider their own needs. So someone has told me that you should fill your own cup first before you can actually use that to fill another person's cup. And this is a good reminder of self-kindness. The second one is to develop common humanity versus isolation. So remember, the old brain tries to sometimes isolate us in order to protect us. And actually anxiety and depression are protective measures of our, call it our old brain. It tries to protect us by having anxiety and having depression and trying to keep us isolated when we feel vulnerable, rather than having the courage. And this is very important to understand, that compassion is connected to, and it requires a lot of courage. So common humanity is recognizing that these experiences are a normal part of being human. It normalizes suffering. It understands that it's part of the human condition, that all people go through this in one way or the other, or one time or another. And the third element of self-compassion is mindfulness versus over-identification. So over-identification means to ruminate, to worry, to be fearful, to think that the bad things in ourselves and the things that we feel, think, and do are a part of our identity or are our identity. Mindfulness, on the other way, means to accept that these things are temporary. What we think and feel and do are temporary. They will come and go naturally. And we need to foster the acceptance and awareness and non-judgment of what we are thinking and feeling and doing, and be aware of our physical, emotional, and mental pain. I'm saying pain, but any experience whatsoever that we feel in the moment, and accept that it is normal. So the first one, let's look at self-kindness in a bit more detail. That means to treat the self and others with care and understanding. So this involves active soothing and comforting. And this is where the action part actually comes in. It's good, but not good enough to just think about and feel the self-kindness. We actually have to take steps to do self-kindness. So it entails being warm and understanding toward ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, or when we feel inadequate. And we'll look at some exercises in a few minutes. Instead of overwhelming ourselves with feelings of self-criticism, blame, guilt, regret, shame, sadness, hopelessness, or worry, we need to learn to exercise self-kindness. And again, it's not only in our thinking and our emotions only, but also in our doing. So we take steps to soothe and nurture ourselves when we confront our pain rather than avoiding it or getting angry. And this is important. Anger also is an avoidance tactic, as are many other things, in engaging in risky behavior, dangerous behavior, substance abuse, depression, anxiety. These are all avoidance tactics that our brain actually tries to get ourselves to go into in order to distract ourselves, try and distract ourselves from the feelings that we have, from our pain, in order, as I said, to protect ourselves. So you need to be a little bit self-kind to your brain as well for putting you in these positions and for creating these situations where you do things that may not be as helpful as your brain may think it might have been. So instead, we acknowledge our problems and shortcomings without judgment so that we can do what is necessary to help ourselves. So when we acknowledge our problems and shortcomings and accept it, we are aware of it, so we accept it without judgment. It balances, it takes away that need for the brain to protect it. So it balances our thoughts and emotions so that we can actually are more free to take more helpful action than when we were in the stress cycle, in the stress cycle that we talked about before. So again, it alleviates that stress cycle, and the caring, soothing system or response system, it elevates so that you can work from that basis rather than from stress. Common humanity. So common humanity means seeing the experience of the self and others as a necessary part of the larger human experience. So we can talk about what this means from an existential viewpoint, but I would say it's necessary. Suffering is necessary because it's like an anti-point to feeling joy. If you only felt the one side, you will probably not grow at all as a human being, and collectively we will not grow as humankind. So common humanity entails recognizing that the human condition is imperfect, but that we are not alone in our suffering. So it's a collective thing, and it's a collective drive to actually try to teach us something, to get us to learn something, to grow, to build better experiences eventually, to reflect, to take action that may be difficult, to push ourselves out of our comfort zone so that we can grow and build something better. We need to understand that we can't always get that we desire or be who we want to be. And this, again, is part of the human experience. And we share this with everyone else on the planet. To be honest, I can't imagine if everybody can just get what they want, what they desire, or be who they want to be without any effort whatsoever, where we would be as a humankind. And maybe this is the one thing that we need to teach as many people as possible, and to practice and to help as many people as possible learn these exercises and skills so that we can actually move forward in a collective sense. So this is what makes us authentically human. And we tend to forget that failure and imperfection are a normal part of life and growth. So without failure and imperfection, again, I don't think there'll be much growing going on at all. The third element of compassion and self-compassion is mindfulness. So this is an awareness of the present moment experience with acceptance and non-judgment. And it requires the noticing of the suffering of the self and others. Just noticing, just observation and experiencing it without avoidance or aversion. So we don't turn away, we don't distract ourselves, allow our mind to try and have us do other unhelpful things. We just notice the suffering as objectively as possible. So it involves turning toward our painful thoughts and emotions and seeing them as they are, without suppressing them, without trying to avoid them, which is a purposeful, temporary, and normal action if you start to practice it and become adept in taking this approach. So we are mindful of suffering before we automatically going into problem-solving mode, which is a very important point as well, and we'll get back to this in a few minutes too. We recognize the need to comfort ourselves for our difficulties before acting. So we always say between the thought and the action, there's a space, and this is where the awareness of our emotions and our thoughts come in. So awareness creates a buffer between our instinctively thinking something and reacting to it. And that is exactly where compassion comes in. So it means not to over-identify with negative thoughts or feelings. And when we do that, when we over-identify and we ruminate and we build these patterns of similar thoughts and feelings constantly over time, it actually turns to lasting beliefs. And these lasting beliefs, belief system, if it creates hasty reactions that are unhelpful. The four cornerstones of mindfulness. So these four aspects are cumulative and they build on each other. And they unfold spontaneously with consistent practice. So again, it's something that you can learn, something that you can exercise. And it's being called the umbrella of mindfulness, and it starts with M1. So paying attention to your experience in the present moment. M2, then relating to that experience without judgment or resistance. So you can do this in an everyday mindfulness exercise like walking or eating, for instance, or doing anything, even exercising, doing yoga, just focusing, paying attention on your experience in the present moment. Experiencing your senses, your thoughts, your emotions, as they come and go, relating to that experience of your senses and thoughts and emotions without judgment or resistance. Then M3, and this is important that you take care to understand and consider M3 and M4 as well. So M3 is relating to the experiencer with the desire to alleviate suffering with compassion. The experiencer can be yourself or another person, and you develop that desire to alleviate whatever they are struggling with. And then M4 is understanding the nature of both the experience and the experiencer, which is the experience does not make the experiencer, so they are some kind of a separation between the two. Remember that the experience is temporary, and that is where wisdom comes in. And again, the experience and the experiencer can be the self or another person. So by giving consideration when you are practicing mindfulness, either in meditation or everyday practices, you consider M1, M2, M3, and M4 as you do your practice. So the effects of self-compassion, quickly before we get to some of the exercises. There's less psychopathology, so you're going to have less anger, frustration, you're going to have less shame and guilt, depression, anxiety, all of that. It's positively correlated with resilience and more thoughtful and positive reactions to negative events. And all of these effects come from research studies. You will have an improved psychological adjustment to adverse situations that last over time. So you're going to learn to be resilient and to actually adapt to them much better. You're going to be more likely to bounce back after failure. It's associated with more motivation to change, learn, and avoid repetitive mistakes. Research has shown that self-compassion is linked to more empathy, altruism, better perspective taking of what you are going through and what other people are going through, and forgiveness as well, both for the self and for another person. So remember that compassion, the flow of compassion to other people actually starts with a flow of compassion between the self and the self-compassion. It's going to boost your psychological strengths like happiness, optimism, wisdom, curiosity, initiative, and emotional intelligence as well. So the biological profile of having mindful compassion. I'm talking about the vagal tone, that's a nerve in our body, and autonomic flexibility. And this purely means that you'll be able to relax faster after stress. So after you've had a stressful reaction, you're going to be able to return to normal much quicker than if you didn't have a developed sense of full compassion. Oxytocin is the bonding chemical, so that's going to be released, and it's going to help you open up to an experience. It's going to help you be trustful of other people and open up to receive other people's trust too. And that is, of course, going to help you in help seeking, help receiving, and help giving behaviors. So the hypothalamic midbrain is the one that feels the emotion. So you're going to have a felt sense of social bonding when you have developed your mindful compassion. The connections between the reward and social engagement and expertise pathways. So that's also a part of the brain that involves dopamine, and that motivates action. So if you've got a developed sense of mindful compassion, it's going to motivate, it's going to release, activate that part of the brain, release dopamine, and motivate you to act in accordance to your feelings of compassion. So fear, vigilance, I've told you before that is going to go down. It's going to deactivate. It's going to not be, it's going to de-intensify. And then on the opposite of that, your social engagement and expertise pathways are going to elevate, they're going to intensify and become stronger, which is exactly what you want. So you want behaviors that are not fear-based, vigilance-based, but actually connected, based on connectedness with yourself and others. So the overregulation of attunement and emotion suppression is going to deactivate, it's going to de-intensify as well. So you're going to be able to focus on cognitions rather than being overwhelmed by emotions in the moment and feeling the need to try and suppress them to make it more bearable. So the ACT triflex, ACT stands for acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's a school of thought or approach in psychotherapy based on the three pillars: to be present, that's mindfulness; opening up, which is acceptance; and do what matters, which is based on your values, and it drives committed action. So be present is understanding that the self is in a certain context, accepting that, making contact with the present moment, and then diffusing. So accepting without judgment is giving you the ability to diffuse from your pain and your suffering at that moment, because you accept it as being normal, as being part of, as we said before, the human condition, and that it's actually an opportunity for growth and for learning. And in the center there is the outcome of this all, of the three pillars, is going to give you psychological flexibility. So training the compassionate mind, not going to go into detail. It show you the aspects of everything you can train in order to increase your passion. So behavior, emotions, your motivation to have compassion, using imagery, attention, and reasoning is your cognitive or your logical part. The first exercise that I quickly want to go through is when you become aware of a difficult experience or sensation that you are going through, you simply repeat the following statements. You say, first of all, this is a moment of suffering. So this is mindfulness. You bring an awareness to what you are feeling and experiencing. Secondly, you state, suffering is a part of life. And this is a statement of common humanity. And in the third place, you state, may I be kind to myself. And this is your statement of self-kindness. And just saying these three things to yourself make an enormous difference. And if you repeat it and become used to this, make it a practice that you do every time that you're in a difficult experience, this will help you develop self-compassion. So it's incredible. Just these three short sentences, repeating them will help you develop self-compassion. So I call it a self-compassion break. So you give yourself compassion not to feel better, but because you feel pain. It provides an emotional safety needed to mindfully open to our pain. So the outcome may be that we feel better eventually, but we don't do this with the intent of feeling better, but just to mindfully open ourselves to our experience and to give us that sense of love, life, light, and hope. And I call it mindfulness and compassion in a beautiful dance that gives us that light, love, light, and hope. And these are the things that is so incredibly integral to self-compassion. So again, mindfulness, this is a moment of difficulty, common humanity. Struggle is part of life that we all experience. And then self-compassion, you say to yourself what you would have said to a good friend. Finding your compassionate voice. We all have an inner critic. And it's not wrong. It's part of our mind that actually tries to, maybe it's in its misguidedness, but it's really trying to help us. So we expand loving kindness phrases into a natural conversation with a compassionate part of ourselves. So we've got a compassionate part, we've got an inner critic, and the inner critic, nothing wrong with that part of our mind, with a sense or a being, or however we want to imagine our inner critic. It's just trying to help us. So we create an opposing part, the compassionate part that talks to the inner critic, and together they sort things out. So the intention of the compassionate self is to love you and not to want you to suffer. So eventually, instead of the inner critic, the new compassionate language flow from this intention. And it says, you can have courage. May I forgive myself? I love you. Or, I've done something stupid, but it's not the end of the world. It's not the fact that I'm stupid. I've just done something stupid, and I'll do something differently, or take care not to do the same in the future. So it's not to identify with the inner critic, but it's teaching the inner critic, in a sense, to be closer to the compassionate self and to be more constructive in the process. And the third exercise, taking a mindful seat. So this is where you sit down and you notice all the sensations and senses that you feel, like where you touch the chair, your feet on the ground. It helps you to feel grounded as well, to feel part of your then you label and recognize the emotions that you are feeling right now. So you just feel, don't try and avoid it, don't try and suppress it, don't linger too much on it either, don't let it overwhelm you, just label and recognize. Observe your thoughts as external and separate entities. Do you find that there are judgments? There are thoughts that are intolerant, maybe thoughts of hopelessness. And then in the fourth instance, you think about what you would want to do right now and why. Just be open, honest. Don't try and hold anything back, hide anything. What do you really want to do and why? So just let these sensations and thoughts and feelings come and go. And this will raise awareness and acceptance of all your experiences in the moment. And the outcome is usually that it diffuses you and yourself from the difficulty that you perceive, and it changes your perspective from something that you can make a difference, that you can change things, and that there are hope. And it places you in a much better position to take a helpful action. The fourth exercise, and I'm going to just explain this quickly in two parts. And this is part of the previous one, where you recognize and label emotions. So this is acknowledging difficult emotions. So remember that every emotion has a purpose. It's, again, your mind and your body trying to do something that it instinctively feel will help you cope, will help you survive, will help you feel better. It may be misguided and it may be causing more pain, more harm than what it is intending, but it's really trying to do something good. Our minds try to justify and rationalize or find meaning to the emotion rather than exploring this lower physical manifestation. So what does this mean? It means that when you feel an emotion, you should actually also take the time to feel and to sense where it is, where you are experiencing it in your body. So you take the time to locate and anchor that emotion in your body. And this helps you actually to moderate and to change it. And then finally, you label this difficult emotion with a gentle and understanding voice, and then find the emotion expresses itself as a body sensation. So you locate and find it in your body and you say, this is anger. I'm feeling it in my stomach and I'm feeling it in my jaw, for instance. And this is anger, and I understand that my mind and my emotions are trying to help me to deal with something. And this acceptance and this recognition and awareness will actually help you to moderate that, to make the emotion less intense, so that you can change it into something else, maybe intense anger into annoyance or frustration, or grief into less intense sadness, for instance. And this is part 2, and this is simply a design that you can use to help visualize the emotions. So you choose the emotion, you can choose your own colors, your own shapes, whatever feels natural for you, and then you can actually indicate where you feel that in your body using that outline on the left-hand side. And the last exercise here is a very, very interesting and very important one. And that's an imagery, to develop an imagery of your compassionate best self. So first of all, you invite your inner critic into your mind awareness. And you think about and you feel, how does it look? How does that inner critic look and feel to you? What does it see and do? What is its shape, its color? What is its energy? What is its intention? What is your critic worried or afraid of? Remember that I said your inner critic is there for a reason. It's because it's worried or afraid. It may be worried that if it's not criticizing you or reminding you of something that you're not doing right, that you're not going to perform, you're going to fail in the future. So it's worried or afraid of something. Now, after you've done that, visualize its alter ego or a compassionate essence. Imagine its essence, shape, color, identity, texture, temperature, whatever you can do to actually visualize that in your mind's eye very vividly, whatever feels right to you. Then imagine, what is it saying to you and your inner critic? What does it say to you and your inner critic? So does it say, I understand what you're trying to do, but I don't feel that you're going in the right direction? You must remember that the failure may be I have failed, but it is not a part of my identity. it does not mean that I'm going to fail next time as well. We need to be more constructive in how we approach the situation. So this is just an example of what your compassionate self may be saying to your inner critic. So in this way, you build on your compassionate self, and you visualize it often, and you engage with it often, and you make it a part of your inner language, your inner dialect, and what you're saying to yourself on a regular basis. And I'm gonna, this is the last slide, I think, actually, that I want to conclude with. And it's an important thing that associates with many of the concepts that I've explained earlier. And it's Paul Gilbert's 3 circles of emotion regulation. So we talked about the threat system often, and that is where your mind finds itself in often when you are in a difficult situation. And what we tend to do is we bounce around from the threat system to the drive system and back again. So we feel we become aware of the threat system, a threat, and we look for a solution. We try to find goals and tasks, and we build habits, and we find ourselves quickly back in the threat system, and we bounce back to the drive system. And it becomes more and more frantic and less helpful as we bounce back and forth. So what we don't take into account is we need to involve the soothing system. We need to actually intentionally and deliberately slow down, soothe, rest, digest, feel safeness, kindness, and care before we can go and look at what goals to set, what things to do, what tasks to accomplish, what habits to build. Because otherwise we're going to get stuck in between the drive and the threat system and not ever get out of that. So we need to do the things, build self-compassion in order to get out of that bouncing back and forth, and just slow down and do things differently. It's important that we don't get stuck in the way that we've done things like before. We need to take things slowly and do things differently. And just a couple of final thoughts before I conclude. And before I conclude, I just want to ask you guys to do one or more of the exercises and to write about your experience in the forum. I would actually love to see what helped and how your experiences were, and whether it was helpful, and how you progressed, and what you thought the benefits were. So as I said just now, self-compassion is the antidote to paralyzing shame and fear, and the stress system, and getting stuck between the drive and the stress system. It deactivates the threat system and activates the caring, soothing system. So self-compassion helps you get out of that cycle. Our minds are a range of potential motives, ways of thinking and behaving, and we can easily dissociate one state of mind from another. So the idea of self-compassion is to bring all our parts together in one accepting whole, and be aware of that whole. So improving our understanding of compassion, what facilitates it and what inhibits it, both as a giver and as a receiver, we are better able to cultivate compassion. And that's why starting to cultivate compassion by practicing self-compassion is the best first step that you can take. So self-compassion creates new ways of feeling and behaving that free you from your previous habits and limits. So you don't necessarily have to go and set goals and take action steps. If you work on self-compassion, these things may come naturally, and it will most certainly come more easier than if you don't involve self-compassion. As such, self-compassion is the most powerful inner resource that you can have, and it spills over to everyone around you and to everything that you do as well. And I want to conclude with a saying by the Dalai Lama, and he said that the cultivation of compassion is no longer a luxury, but a necessity if our species is to survive. So just two books there's some good reading material, The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion, and Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. So please go and do one or more of the exercises and let us know your feedback on that. And it was great to have been here and to see all of you here. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. So just leaving that on the screen from Carl Rogers, the curious paradox is then only when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you all soon again.